Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. Now today we're going on another one of our journeys around the world, and this time we're going to Asia. And we're going to be painting this little fisherman and his boat. So come and join me and we'll paint this step by step together. Today's materials. My paper I'm using is some lovely Saunders Waterford 300-pound rough. It's nice and thick so it won't need stretching, but any decent watercolour paper will do. My paints, I'm going with a fairly limited palette today. Cobalt Blue, Cadmium Yellow, Cadmium Orange, Payne's Grey, Prussian Blue and some burnt Umber. Just 3 brushes. My number 6 round, 3/4 inch flat and my trusty number 3 rigger. And all details of these can be found in the description below. Now, as Payne's Grey is playing quite a major part in today's tutorial, I thought you might be interested in seeing how different each manufacturer's version is of the colour, ranging from a very black to quite a distinct blue. And as I'm after a good bluish feel today, I'm going to be going with this Renesans version. Not sponsored, of course. But I have to say I'm loving our own version, mixed only half an hour ago by Margot and Laura. Now I'd love to use it today, but it's so fresh it hasn't even set yet, so maybe next week. Okay, so here's the stunning reference photo by Richard Mcall. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but it's definitely Asia. Right, so here's the line drawing, which is available to download free of charge from my website, link in the description below. And you can see from the original, I've moved the waterline up a little, just to give a little more space for him to fish in. Next, with a little masking fluid, I'm just preserving a few of these lighter areas. It will just make painting the water that much easier. Okay, so to start with, I'm wetting the background here down to the horizon line with some not so clean water. And then with my flat brush, painting in a light and graduated wash of Prussian Blue. Then with a damp brush, lifting out this little corner of the hillside. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a couple of techniques for painting sparkling water. No, not that. And this first one is the dry brush technique. Now, using my flat brush and a fairly wet paint mix, I'm quickly dragging my brush across the surface of the paper. Now, you must use either cold press or rough watercolour paper, as the intention is to paint the hills of the texture, leaving the valleys white and unpainted. Another approach is to rub in a few bands of white candle wax, and again I'm just applying to the top surface of the paper. Then when you paint in your wash, the wax works as a resist and gives you this wonderful sparkle effect. Then let it dry. Now, one disadvantage of the wax approach is that the wax will always stay on the paper. It's impossible to remove. So if you're intending to overpaint something, it will always resist any further paint. So I'm going to go for the dry brush technique using some Cobalt Blue. And here you can see how much easier it is not having to paint around the boat and the figure due to the masking fluid. paint to the bottom to get this graduated wash. Next, I'm lifting out with a damp brush, and you may have to do this several times if your wash is particularly wet. And now with a more concentrated creamy mix of the Cobalt Blue. So now it's time to let this totally dry, and it's a perfect time for a short break and a glass of, well, what else could you have but tiger beer. Next, with some watery Prussian Blue, a few loose details of distant trees and other stuff. Okay, so now let's remove the masking fluid. Now with some Payne's Grey, a nice creamy dark mixture, I'm painting in the Fisherman and the boat, all done with my number 6 round brush. I've just dropped in a little dab of Cadmium orange here. And what I'm doing here is getting the value much darker on the right hand side of the boat. I'm also diluting the paint in some areas just to get a slightly lighter value. When this is dried, I'm painting in a 50-50 mix of cadmium yellow and cadmium orange. then dropping in wet, some orange on its own. This here is just some burnt umber. A stronger mix here, and then blending with some Payne's grey, and then using it to darken some areas even more. And the same mixture again here for the poles. And now for his hat, and this is just some cadmium yellow, but leaving a little white highlight on the left hand side. And while still wet, dropping in a little burnt umber for the shadow side. Next for the boat's reflection, and I'm re-wetting this bottom section under the boat. Now as you can see from the photo, it's got a hard edge reflection, but I'm going for a slightly different approach with a soft wetting wet effect. So all I'm doing here is dropping in corresponding colours to the above with my flat brush. Tilting my board to an angle of about 45 degrees and letting the colour run down. And give it just a little spray to make the colours move a little. And you may have to do this several times. And here I'm just using a little white acrylic ink just to pick up a few highlights, still done wet in wet. Now this is dried, you can see that I've lost a few of those nice dark reflections, so I'm just painting them back in again with some Payne's grey. here for a few watery Prussian Blue ripples. Magic scalpel time, of course, so I want to bring out the sparkling water a little more, and this cheap craft knife is the perfect thing. Just skim the top of the paper. You don't have to dig deep, just scratch off the top layer of the paint. Next, with my white pastel pencil, and of course you can use some white gouache or acrylic paint just for these nice little highlights. And now with a nice bright yellow for the reflection of his hat. There we go, I think we're done. Now, it's always good to have another look at your painting the next day with fresh eyes. And I've noticed I've missed the pole here behind his head, as well as a few more details on the boat, and a little more contrast in the distance. I'm also feeling that these distant mountains could easily be mistaken for the sky, so I'm adding in a few details as seen here in the reference photo to suggest perhaps a village or something here in the distance. Yep, now I think we're done. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give it a go. It's not too difficult this week, it's quite a limited palette, but just make sure you get that drawing right first, it's quite important. Anyway, please don't forget to do all the normals, like, subscribe, leave a comment, And as always, I look forward to seeing you next week for another Watercolour Wednesday. Take care, and bye for now.